right, welcome back to class. Yesterday we made some abstract paintings using space, a nebula, a galaxy, northern lights as our like kind of inspiration or a thought process. In order to make these happen, what we did is we used wet into wet paint mixing to kind of let the colors pool and play together. I also used some paper towel lift off and used some salt to give me some kind of starry texture in my painting. When my Northern Lights rectangle was dry, I went back and painted some trees. And so we were basing our abstract work yesterday on reality. I can go to Google and I can search for a nebula. We have images that look like these. Today we're going to play with shapes and marks to make our abstract paintings. And so today, because it's about shapes and lines and marks, there is no one right way to do this. So you can see that just like yesterday, I'm gonna tape my sketchbook paper into two long rectangles. I have to think about that my paint is transparent, right? So you can see my stripes show through. So that is, you know, like I did stripes in the background first, let them dry, put shapes over the top, let those dry, put more shapes over the top, let that dry, played around with some dry brush mark making on both of these. So for this other one, shapes, wet circles, wet circles, wet circles to let the paint run into each other. I let them all dry. And then I went back and experimented with exploring some kind of marks over the top. For these, I used a lot of different colors. For these two, you can see they are both really different. So we're going to today, like I said, explore marks and shapes as our inspiration. And there are a lot of ways to do this. A couple of things that I want to think about today as I'm working. Thing one is that I am using my sketchbook paper, right? So that's the paper that came folded in half. I'm working on just the opposite side of the sheet from the nebula. I could, of course, be working on the back side of my texture techniques. I can use whichever sheet works for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sketchbook paper and I'm going to go ahead and tape out two rectangular pieces. We're going to do this when we paint landscapes next week too. So I'm just going to go down the center of my sheet. And what this does is it allows me to kind of play with two paintings at the same time. Kind of exploring, working back and forth so that my paint isn't always just wet into wet. I can let one dry while I paint on the opposite one. And using the tape kind of keeps them in two separate sections so that I can peel off the tape later and have the effect of two separate compositions or two separate little paintings on that one sheet of paper. So that is how I'm starting off here, is some tape. I also do just really love peeling that tape off and having those nice sharp edges. So that makes me happy. Okay, so I'm just gonna start with some paint. Remember, my inspiration today is shapes, marks, and then as a side inspiration, we would also have the idea of lines and layers. Okay. Shapes, marks, lines, and layers are kind of my themes for today as I'm painting. So I'm just gonna go ahead and dive in. You certainly could make some lines on the paper first, if that's what works for you. I am just gonna go ahead and just start painting. I am not gonna think too much about it. I'm going to just kind of let the paint explore the space. I'm gonna let some of these colors kind of munge into each other a little bit here. Not going to worry too much as I work to start with. I'm gonna play with like dry lines over the top of wet shapes. And then I'm gonna switch up my color and maybe go this other direction. And then I'm gonna switch to the other sheet. Right now, I'm not crazy about what's going on here, but I do know that I'm going to need to let it dry and kind of come back to it as an idea. So there you go, phase one, some lines, some shapes. The second composition here, I'm gonna start out just a little bit different. And I think I'm gonna start with some lines. I'm gonna let those lines kind of bump into each other. And I'm just gonna sort of shift the color as I work a little bit here. Again, I'll have to come back at this after it's dry for a little while. But you can see for this one, I started with some lines and some shapes. Over here, I'm starting really differently, and I'm starting with some lines and some marks. I might paint on this one a little more, give that one a chance to dry. Really, as I'm painting, I'm exploring sort of what the paint will do. I don't have a lot of planning going into these. It's more about painting and reacting to what's on the sheet. And then deciding if I like it or if I need to change it. So you can see I didn't like that hard edge over there. I'm gonna go ahead and just give everything a smooch. The great thing about working with watercolor is that this paint is never permanent. It's always going to wet and loosen up with some new water. Okay, so now that one has to dry before I can do anything else over there. Let's go back to this side and try to imagine what else I can do. The great thing is because it's an abstract and because I'm working with lines and shapes, I could go ahead and I can turn my paper and get a little different viewpoint, a little different perspective, and work from there again. Maybe I switch and go back to this one when it's wet. Yeah, that's the hard thing about working with abstract is you don't know for sure what you're doing. And so you're kind of playing. So it becomes about the moment and just sort of making a decision about that moment. I'm gonna use some paper towel to make a little texture on this color. Another thing you could do is you could use salt, remember, or alcohol. And you can see as my colors layer over each other, we get some sort of depth built up. I can also do some stamping. So I found this, it's the cap. It's the cap to a pen, but it makes these really great little circles. I can also look at what the other end of it looks like, the more solid space. It's gonna give me something that's like a dot. And I don't know that I'm particularly in love with, but there we go. It's on there now, we get to deal with it. Let's see, I'm gonna turn it this way. And as I keep working, there are definitely times that I do not like what I have on the paper. And I'm just continuing to like kind of modify and adjust as I go, knowing that the longer I work, I'm not gonna necessarily mess it up. But that eventually something should start to like work. I'm gonna let that one dry now. Oh, maybe I'm gonna do a little bit more of this from the other direction. And maybe think about something over here. You can, if you have markers or pens, also think about letting it completely dry and working over the top with another material, another art material. That would always be acceptable as well. Taking a risk, going bright. And I'm just gonna keep going until I feel like it is finished. Remembering as I work that I'm thinking about making lines and marks and shapes. I'm also thinking about having the effect of some layers in my work. one more orange dot and this guy will finally be done. I think making abstracts is a good lesson in kind of pushing yourself past what you're comfortable doing. And it's also a good way to just sort of explore some of the possibilities of watercolor and how to keep working until you feel like something might be finished. All right. Have fun. Remember to focus on shapes, marks, lines, and layers.